Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Doctor Who, the classic series Action Figures A History. In the 8th episode of this series, we're going to be continuing our look at the 2011 releases as a part of the Forbidden Planet exclusive line, taking a look at more variants of Daleks, more variations of Doctors, and of course the debut of Louise Jameson as Leela within the classic series line, and further variants of Peri as portrayed by Nicola Bryant. This period does of course also rather excitingly see the release of a mechanoid from the First Doctor's story, The Chase, one of the first and only enemies of the First Doctor to be released as a part of the series, which is something of which there is an ongoing shame for the classic series line, as we always had a massive absence of First and Second Doctor enemies, and it would have been lovely to see more. However, sadly, we never did. Of course, this is now the 8th episode of the series, meaning that this project is well underway, so if you haven't already, please do check out the previous episodes as a part of this series. We have covered so many action figures so far, and it has been absolutely brilliant looking back and reflecting upon childhood memories, as these are the very action figures that I collected as a kid. And also an additional thank you to Batman March, also known as Matthew Toffolo, of course, for filling in for some of the products that I didn't manage to pick up back in the day, as well as of course Macaulay Carnes for taking further photos of some of the other items that I do not own, a few of the smaller gaps here and there, and also thank you to him for being a general continuity checker as well. So without further ado, let's kick off with further Doctor Who classic series action figures. June 2011 seen the release of that year's San Diego Comic-Con exclusive figure, and this time, rather excitingly, we have the release of a new classic series Doctor Who companion, and one of the more iconic ones alongside Sarah Jane Smith. It is of course the 4th Doctor companion, Leela, as she first appeared within her debut story, The Face of Evil. Now this figure has in fact only ever been released once, and that was a part of SDCC, and later released as a Forbidden Planet exclusive. Of course, there was other variations of Leela released, most notably in her Invasion of Time and Image of the Fendal outfit. However, this is the only ever time that the more tribal outfit of the Sever team was in fact released, arguably the more iconic version of Leela's costume. Very much like the previous release of the Destiny of the Daleks collector set, featuring Davros and the 4th Doctor along with 2 Daleks, this figure in fact seen an identical second release, however this time round a signature edition featuring of course Louise Jameson's signature, which I do believe was once again a Forbidden Planet exclusive. This was in fact the only SDCC release of the classic series for 2011, so we are in fact seeing a little bit of a decline by this point of SDCC releases. Of course, previously in other years we've seen a whole 5 box set releases, however this time round we only have 1 figure. Certainly was a lot of effort put in to make the costume look like what was seen on TV. So we have this really lovely, almost braided section at the very top, including a red paint app, along with the brown costume underneath, with once again a few red lines on this to replicate what I believe is almost a stitching pattern throughout the design itself, which does also continue onto the back of the figure. Of course, in the lower half we do get the almost bandolier section, including the blue piece of material, and then we also have her utility belt, which does feature a number of different pouches and things like that, as well as on the side we have a little pouch of Janus thorns, as well as the pouch which does of course hold her knife accessory. On the very back, once again, the bandolier design almost continues with this blue paint app with a few intricate patterns, including brown and a few red polka dots. Towards the bottom of the figure, once again we just have the bare legs, much like how we have the bare arms as well, with no clothing detailing. However, at the very bottom we do have the inclusion of the boots, a rather nice texture, including darker yellowy colours as well as a browner base coat. Taking a look at the likeness to Louise Jameson, I think that thankfully, due to the costume itself, you can kind of automatically tell who the character is meant to be, due to the costume being incredibly unique. However, I do think the likeness is okay. It does kind of look like Louise Jameson. We have a few sharp details of paint taps around the eyes, indication of the eyebrows in there as well, and then we do also have the sculpting of the hair, which doesn't really have too much paint application. We seem to just have a standard brown coating of paint really, with what I can see a slight wash added over the top to highlight a few of the details, however not that much. The later releases of Leela would in fact see a slightly lighter brown colour within the hair, which I do believe may in fact represent the slight change in hair colour that she also may have had throughout the TV show itself, but that or this figure was just too dark within its hair paint apps in the first place. Due to Leela being a warrior of the Severed team, she does of course come with a plethora of many different accessories, which I suppose kind of makes up with the lack of SDCC figures from this year. Even though we get one figure, it is one brand new sculpt of a Doctor Who companion that a lot of people wanted, and plus she comes with quite a lot of accessories, the first of which is of course the crossbow. This does have some nice detailing on, and you can also put the Janus Thorn in the very middle here as well, much like how I did, and we do also have the silver paint apps on there as well to represent the metal sections. It nicely wraps around the figure's shoulder if you so wish to do so, and it is a nice display piece and also good to pose with if you can get her into the correct position, which is often a little bit of a struggle. To go alongside the Arrow set, we do of course have the inclusion of the Janus Thorn. Now this is absolutely tiny, and it does have a rather nice piece of paint application, with of course the darker brown running up the middle, and then of course the lighter brown sections at the very top. And to be honest, I just recommend putting this away once again in storage in order to avoid losing this, because it is absolutely tiny. However, it is nice to see it included. Much like all Leela figures, she does also come with her knife accessory, which can also be fitted into her pouch. And finally, she does also come with a rather futuristic looking gun accessory, which I must admit, when posed with this, she actually looks pretty cool, and she holds it in a rather natural manner. And of course, it was also really lovely to be able to display a companion who wasn't K9 next to the 4th Doctor. I can in fact remember when Leela was originally released, because I was at an event at school, and I can remember coming out of the event and then opening my phone and actually seeing the notification about this release and being incredibly excited. However, the wait for the inevitable release of this figure in the UK seemed so long away, and waiting for it in anticipation, of course finally we did get to add it to our collections, and it was certainly worth the wait. For the next Forbidden Planet exclusive collector set, we travel to France to take a look at another Classic Series 2-pack focused around a 4th Doctor adventure. It is of course the City of Death, featuring another variation of 4th Doctor alongside Count Scarleone, also known as Scaroth, and this set does of course also feature, rather cleverly, the Mona Lisa. Now, much like the previous release from this series, being the SDCC Face of Evil Leela figure, this set was also released twice once again, with the identical contents. However, there was a standard edition and also a signature edition, featuring the signature of Julian Glover, who does of course also play Scaroth within the story. So taking a look first at the 4th Doctor. Now, for those of you that have seen the previous episode of this series, where I'd taken a look at the Destiny of the Dalek set, you'll of course know that this body has been released before, and generally just taking off the scarf, we have exactly the same details once again, as it is exactly the same costume. The one minor difference being that the 4th Doctor is now sporting his rather iconic paint palette badge, as seen throughout the City of Death, and that the booted legs of the 4th Doctor have now been replaced by a rather standard looking Wave 1 sculpt, this time round with shoes at the bottom that have been painted a rather yellowy brown colour. The major difference of the figure overall is an accessory that the product comes with, being a reuse of the Season 18 4th Doctor scarf sculpt, however now painted to look more like the iconic 4th Doctor scarf that is of course in the multicoloured design. Personally, I think that this makes the figure look a whole world worth of better. It makes the figure look a lot more in proportion, and generally overall I think it suits the costume a lot more than the Wave 1 variation of 4th Doctor scarf. Although talking about the actual colours themselves, I think this is completely inaccurate and a little bit messy in parts as well. As you can see, especially here, a few of the rows are a little bit off, especially around this middle section where the different rows of the scarf overlap, so it is a little bit messy. However, I still think it does look better than that original version that was released within the Destiny of the Dalek set. Figure does also come with the sonic screwdriver accessory as per usual, and thankfully they've also done something with the head of the figure, meaning that it sits on the body a lot better. For those of you that have once again seen the previous review of the Destiny of the Dalek set, you will know that there was something about the neck that just looked incredibly lanky and unusual and like he had a giraffe neck, This one does sit on the body a little bit better. However, the likeness is once again a little bit unusual. The eyes seem to be okay, however a little bit dead. The sculpt of the hair is exactly the same to Wave 1, but the lips have been given this very unusual purpley colour that also has a little bit of a paint bleed on there as well, making it look like he's almost snarling a little bit, which is a little bit of a shame. However, it doesn't really bother me too much. A rather brilliant choice of accessory that really adds to this set is the inclusion of a framed Mona Lisa painting, plastic detailing around the frame itself that has been painted gold and given a slight weathered wash. On the very back of this we do also get the inclusion of this wooden texture design that would naturally be on an old painting background along with a little bit of company information. However, one of the major details about this can be revealed if you use a UV light. So transferring over into darkness and just tipping the image onto the side, thankfully of course the 10th Doctor sonic screwdriver does indeed have a UV light. Now this will probably be quite hard to pick up on camera, however if you look very carefully around the hand of the Mona Lisa there is just the outline of this, which does of course then read "This is a fake," much like how the 4th Doctor does write on many of the Mona Lisa paintings throughout the story, which is a really cool touch. However, unfortunately doesn't seem to want to show up on camera. I'm pretty sure this was much better when I originally got it back in the day. And now taking a look at the second figure of the set, it is Count Scarleone in his human form, of course as portrayed by Julian Glover. Now this does also have the swappable head, which I will be taking a look at in a second, of course the more well-known Scaroth head. However, this is just the normal humanoid version with his rather smart white suit. I think that the likeness to Julian Glover is pretty decent. Of course we have some rather nice texture detailing on the hair, where we have a few brush strokes of grey added in there to really bring out some of the details, and generally overall the likeness is in fact quite sharp. As you can see, once again the eyebrows have been nicely painted and the eyes are looking in the right direction, and then if you also look closely within the sculpt there is a few creases and wrinkles around the sides of the face, and it does look pretty natural indeed. Moving down to the rest of the figure, this is in fact the use of a primeval body, so it is pretty much just your average suit design really, with the lapels, the buttons and the pockets, which does of course stretch all the way down to the bottom, where we do have the shoes which have been painted a sandy looking yellow with the detailing of some laces. The major difference for this figure compared to that of the primeval one is that the waistcoat has now been included to also feature some buttons, and we have the inner more handkerchief kind of cravat section in the very middle that is one of the more iconic parts of Count Scarleone's costume, where it has been painted in nice blue colour, the golden badge pin piece across the side, as well as the inclusion of the handkerchief as well, which has also been painted in the same bluey green colour. The figure does also come with a standard gun accessory, as well as the addition of the sculpted ring on the side of his finger. Now removing the Julian Glover head to take a look at the Scaroth design. This is just pretty much your regular peg really that you can have interchangeable heads with. And then moving on the Scaroth version, which I tend to have on display for more than the regular Julian Glover head because it is kind of more iconic and more interesting to look at. So this is a pretty basic design really. We have a few swirls and things in there that have been nicely highlighted by a lighter green. Of course those unusual tendrils coming down the sides of the face, and the same pattern is also featured on the back as well. And in the very middle we do of course get the inclusion of Scaroth's eye standing out in the mass of green curls around the sides of his face. And other than that there's nothing really too much else to say. It's a rather standard looking sculpt really of a rather unusual looking head. I think that the City of Death set was always one of those action figure sets that we were expecting to appear at some point, due to Scaroth being a rather unique looking creature that even though he only appeared once, he seems to have made quite an impact within Doctor Who history, and I think that is solely down to the fact as well that the City of Death is an on-location story in Paris along with Romana. It would have been maybe nice to see a potential Romana 2 figure in this set instead of the 4th Doctor, but that would of course require a whole different sculpt. However, it is nice to see an improvement of the 4th Doctor from the previously released Destiny of the Daleks variation, and I imagine that if the single carded wave of action figures continued, then no doubt Scaroth would have been a part of that series as opposed to having a whole set dedicated to him. A reoccurring theme of the Doctor Who Classic Series line is that once you got a Classic Series companion after the original release, you would then go on to get a number of different variants. So here we have the second edition of Leela, this time round in a completely different costume, of course seeing her look from the Invasion of Time. This figure is also packaged alongside another variation of Sontaran, which makes sense once again given that this figure pretty much for the most part consists of reused pieces as seen on the previous Sontaran figures of Styre and Lynx. I think that this might have been another point within the classic series of action figures where character options hit a little bit of a problem. Maybe the popularity in the line was waning a little bit because this set does of course feature essentially two figures that have already came out before, however just with a few retooled parts, and it seems to be that this set is in fact rather easy to find even to this day. So if you're interested by this product, you could probably find one on Amazon or eBay for quite close to the original recommended retail price. And it's not that multiple companion releases are in fact a bad thing, because in the case of Leela, this figure is brilliant and another really lovely costume variation. So for the most part, the sculpt of the head is exactly the same to the original version, so she does have her hair down. However, this time round, the paint application on the hair itself is a little bit darker compared to the SDCC 2011 version of Leela from the Face of Evil, which is a lot more of a lighter brown. This time round, we have a darker base colour with a lighter highlight added over the top. However, of course, the biggest change is within the costume itself. This time round we have a much more basic design, however an effective one. Of course, we have the cream dress with a number of different patterns on. As per usual, we have the holster, which does of course hold the knife accessory, exactly the same accessory that came with the Face of Evil Leela, and then we also have the top half as well, which is exactly the same colour to the original version, and we do have a few creases on this once again, and the same does apply for the back. Now, of course, the main base of this figure is exactly the same, because the thing with the Leela figures is that the actual costume is kind of a PVC piece that is added over the top, which is the main reason why we have this little line here, making different costume variations in fact a very easy option. And of course the lower half of the figure is exactly the same to the previous versions, including the boots there at the very bottom. Set does also come packaged alongside this exclusive accessory, which is the DMAT gun that the Doctor uses throughout the Invasion of Time, which is a rather nice inclusion, even though that both of the characters within this set don't actually use the accessory. And to be honest, I'm quite shocked that Forbidden Planet and Character Options didn't make this a 3-pack and include another variation of the 4th Doctor that would in fact, come to think of it, be very similar to that of the 2019 B&M exclusive 4th Doctor that came alongside the TARDIS from Sharda. This has some really nice detailing. Of course, we have this clear barrel section in the very middle and the holster at the bottom painted grey, and the rest of the actual piece itself is pretty much painted silver, along with of course this funnel section at the very end. And now moving on to the second figure of the set, it is of course Commander Storr, another variant of Sontaran, and of course the third variant of Sontaran that we've seen throughout the 2011 releases. So the body of this figure is exactly the same to the previous Sontarans, some really lovely detailing on this. However, much like all of the previous releases, the main brand new detailing and sculpt does of course rely on the head. And of course, for those of you that have seen the Invasion of Time, you will know that the Sontaran seen throughout the story was a very unusual mask. It was the probably least effective mask that we've ever seen a Sontaran wear during Classic Series Doctor Who, or at least the entirety of Doctor Who for that matter, because it just looked absolutely awful. However, the costume as seen on this figure, or at least the mask, does look pretty decent. He does look like he's sulking a little bit, or he's got a little bit of a strop on, which is rather funny actually, but I think that generally overall the face is in fact a rather nice detailed sculpt. So we do of course have the eyes set back into the face. It does look like he's been in a little bit of a fight, as the majority of the eye sockets have just been painted this dark black colour, so it looks like he's had a little bit of a run-in, has been punched in the eyes several times. Front of the face itself has been given this lighter yellow wash, and the rest of the head is pretty much this sandy orange design. We do in fact have the probic vent at the very back. There's also seen a little bit of a resculpt. Of course, this Sontaran does see a slight revision to to the helmet, a rather large revision in fact, where we have this rather big sort of collar section included around the side. We have the eye slots as per usual, which have been painted black, and then just above this we have a white pattern section, which actually, come to think of it, does look a little bit like a paper boat. Moving down the body now, of course we've seen this all before and it does include exactly the same detail. However, we do have a slight alteration to the belt section, where this now doesn't have any patterning on of any squares or anything like that, and we do have this slightly almost calculator looking communicator piece that's been painted white with a few red bands on, and then we have this other little device at the very side as well that has been painted grey with a red highlight added over this. The rest of the figure uses the Steyr sculpt, so we have the armoured knee plating, and then we also have the armoured boots there at the very bottom as well. However, much like Link's, we do have the inclusion of the holster thigh piece, which can of course hold the wand accessory. Of course, has also been packaged with the 3-finger sculpt, being painted an orange skin tone colour. I think that the Invasion of Time set is a very unusual one, because I can recall when this was released in 2011, I wasn't particularly too excited by it, and even now, when looking back on this set, I'm still not particularly too excited by it. I think it might have been a little bit too much too soon. After already seeing 2 Sontaran figures released in 2011, and then we have the 3rd release here, and then of course seeing another Leela variant quite close after the release of the original version, this set doesn't particularly have too much of a selling point behind it so soon after those other Forbidden Planet collector sets, which admittedly were a little bit more exciting. Following on after the release of the Invasion of Time set, the winter of 2011, seen the release of another companion and villain 2-pack, this time round Peri and Shiraz Jek from the final 5th Doctor story, The Caves of Androzani, of course one of the most popular classic series Doctor Who serials, and I think that this set quite frankly shows up the Invasion of Time set, as I absolutely loved this one as a kid. I found it a lot more exciting than the Invasion of Time set, of course seeing the second ever variation of Peri, alongside another character that is a rather visually striking one, and of course the final villain that the 5th Doctor would of course ever face. Rather unusually, much like the Invasion of Time set, this set does also have the potential to be a 3-pack, as we could have seen the release of a Season 21 5th Doctor, however this time dirtied up to be just before his regeneration, with of course the blood coming from his forehead. However, that of course never did happen. However, we did later see it as a part of the B&M 2019 series. So firstly, taking a closer look at the Peri variant of this set, this figure always surprised me, and it still does to this day, because Character Options of course are well known for reusing sculpts over and over again, especially with their future action figures from the line. However, this time round we have pretty much the opposite of that, as we have a brand new head sculpt that wasn't previously seen on the Vengeance on Varos version of Peri, and it seems like something that is a little bit unnecessary, however more accurate to what is seen within the actual episode. Therefore, I'm not arguing, but I'm just shocked that Character Options really did it in the first place. So this time round, we have a much more bob design on the hair, that lots of different detailing within this as well, having different creases within the different strands of hair. However, this time round, there is absolutely no inclusion of the ears whatsoever. They have in fact been tucked behind the hair, meaning that there is also no exposure of the earrings underneath, and of course the fringe piece as well has also been changed. This time round, it nicely flops over the top of her head, as opposed to almost being stretched out into different strands of hair, much like the Vengeance on Varos version of Peri. The likeness itself is okay, it does kind of look like Nicola Bryant. However, I think that this is an example of a figure where the paint application is the one that lets it down, because the paint itself does seem to be a little bit sloppy in parts, and if anything the paint itself seems to be a bit smudged and a bit thick. So we have the lips that have been painted a rather bright looking pink colour, and the eyes themselves also just look a little bit too big, and of course we have the eyebrows there over the top in a rather cartoonish manner. Just bringing on the original version of Peri, there is a quite obvious difference. As you can see, this is of course the 6th Doctor era variant of a character, and I do like both of the sculpts. I think that both of them are rather nice. However, it's just the paint application, as I say, on this variation that does of course let her down. And of course, moving down to the rest of the costume, this sculpt was later used as a part of the 2 Doctors B&M B&M exclusive 2019 set, and of course it was first used on this figure. This time round we have a baggy shirt that has been wrapped over her usual swimsuit costume, including some green and white squares along with a cream base colour. And then of course just underneath this we have the usual swimsuit design, which is exactly the same sculpt at the very bottom to the previous release. However, this time round it has been painted a rather interesting salmon pink. Belt has also been removed, however it is still there, it's just that the paint application hasn't been given to it, and we do also have the sculpting detail of the keyring as well. However, once again this has not been painted. At the very bottom it's just your usual design, however the high heels this time round have been painted a cream colour as opposed to the vibrant red. The set does also come with this decapitated android head, which is a rather standard sculpt really, just featuring a spherical face along with a circle of white paint in the very middle, and at the very bottom of this we have a series of wires. It's a little bit like handles but on a much more simplistic scale, so that is a nice inclusion, and you can kind of display that next to Peri if you so wish. And then we move on to the more exciting figure of the set, which is of course Scaroth, and it is really lovely to have another classic series villain that did actually only appear once within the TV show. So we have a really lovely intricate design on the helmet or mask, whatever you want to call it. So we have some nice glossy black paint application along with the white alongside this, out the details of the mask itself. We also have the paint application of the lips underneath, which have been given a standard skin tone colour, along with of course the remains of his human face as well on the left hand side, and then we have just one piercing eye on the opposite side as well. As for the rest of the costume, there's not really that much else to talk about. We have this inner sort of neck section here, which does also go down to the waist where there is the belt, and the rest of the body has just been painted a standard black with a few creases and things here and there, with some very standard shoes at the very bottom. The left hand side does of course feature a usual skin tone coloured hand, much like any other figure really, and then on the opposite side we do have a gloved hand, and that is basically it. It is a very simple figure. The same does also apply on the back as well, just a number of different creases here and there, nothing too special, a few pockets, and we did of course see this base sculpt used once again as a part of the standard Axon humanoid figure. A rather brilliant inclusion is the swappable head for Scaroth, which around the back is exactly the same sculpt to the previous head. However, of course, the main elephant in the room is that rather gruesome looking decayed head design. Now, of course, the major half of the right hand side of the face is completely unrecognisable. It's all melted, has loads of different holes in and rips, and generally overall it looks absolutely horrible. And then, of course, the opposite side we do have the inclusion there of the human eye on a natural skin tone. A really lovely design. Actually reminds me very much of the Magnus Greel figure from Wave 1, unveiled mask version of him. It is a rather similar idea, but yeah, I absolutely love this, and it is a brilliant moment within the story itself. And if you are a big fan of the Caves of Androzani, that does of course mean you could buy two different versions of this set and have one of them masked and one not. I think that when it comes down to the contents, the Caves of Androzani set doesn't really sound that exciting. It's just another variant of Peri, using a few parts from the previous release, and of course Scaroth, which for the most part has a very basic body design. However, I think there's something about this set which is brilliant. I think that both of the figures are really lovely. I do love the Peri figure as well. It's probably one of my personal favourites of costume that they've released her in so far. I think that Scaroth is a brilliant inclusion, even though he has a very simplistic costume, and once again, much like the Invasion of Time set, I believe that this one isn't as rare as some of the other classic series Forbidden Planet exclusive sets released over the many years. And of course the inclusion of the swappable head and the decapitated android head is a really lovely touch. For those of you that have been watching this series since its very beginning, you will recall I do believe in episode 2, I'd taken a look at the 4th Doctor Adventure set, and after the release of that set, we didn't see any more adventure sets, very unusually, and I think that I and quite a lot of fans expected that to be a reoccurring theme throughout the classic series of action figures. Now this set is kind of the closest that we got to reprise that format, with the enemies of the 1st Doctor set featuring a Roboman, a Dalek from the Dalek's master plan with Flamethrower, and of course the re-release of the 10th planet Cyberman, looking like the most unconventional Doctor Who family ever. This set was once again one of those products that did remain in stock in Forbidden Planet for quite a while, and I do believe that up until a few years ago you could pick this set up for incredibly cheap. I do believe that I've seen it around £10 or something like that. However, after the stock seems to have run out, I do believe that this set has gone up a little bit in price. However, it is still not too expensive to track down online. first figure of the set and the most interesting of the lot. It is of course the Roboman from the 1964 First Doctor story, The Dalek Invasion of Earth. Now this is a figure that I never quite expected to see. It's kind of along the same lines as Marcus Scarman. It is rather obscure, however a very simple figure to do. Now for the most part this body of this figure is in fact the same body as Scaroth from the City of Death, however this time round painted with a dark greenish colour. So as you can see at the very bottom you have some brownish hues, and then of course the rest of the suit is in fact a pea green. In the very middle we do also have the inclusion of a shirt, which this time round has been painted, and then we do also have a little bit of Dalek lettering along the front of his chest there that has been given a rather nice silver paint tap. Some of the giveaways that this is the Scaroth body, inclusion of this little handkerchief at the very side, as well as the inclusion of this rather large ring on the finger there as well, which has been painted once again a golden colour. And I do believe that this figure was in fact a reuse in the first place of a figure from the Primeval character options line, so this is essentially a reuse of a reuse, which is, I suppose, it's effective and it works well. The main attraction of this figure is of course the weird looking birdcage type thing on his head, which does look rather like the thing as seen throughout the story. So we have the neck brace there at the very bottom, the side panels, even the little satellite dish at the very side so you can get his broadband and all of that. And then of course along the top we do also get the inclusion of some wires, which it may have been nice to see these wires as well as these ones at the very bottom painted with maybe a few reds or greens or something like that, just to make it look a little bit more exciting. And then of course the same does apply around the back as well. A little bit of a brush stroke of wash has been applied over this just to make it look like a almost rusting metal in a way, or a battered metal. And then of course we have the head in the very middle, where we have the most excited looking human in the world, and he looks absolutely overjoyed with life. So we have of course his miserable looking face, and of course his droopy eyes and his rather dead mannerisms, which is rather effective to be honest compared to the Robomen as seen throughout the Dalek Invasion of Earth, and it's quite frankly the face that I pull every single morning when I wake up as well. I have a few different paint taps of hair also around the side, however you can't really see too much of this. I do believe that this is the Roboman from the early half of the Dalek Invasion of Earth that is seen within part 1 I think, but don't quote me on that. However, it's a nice figure and it does look pretty cool. 1960s Dalek of choice for this set is from the Dalek's Master Plan, of course the 12-part epic, written by Terry Nation and Dennis Spooner, and this time round, rather excitingly, we have a little bit of a resculpt. However, the major part of the body itself is exactly the same to every other Dalek. Of course, the main attraction is the utensil that is replacing the manipulator arm. Now of course the main arm itself has been painted your standard silvery colour, and at the very end we have this little cup design, and then we have this rather lovely transparent plastic that has been used to recreate this flame. So we have a slightly yellowy section at the very top, and then that goes down to more red at the very base, which is really lovely, and it's one of those designs that actually is very light as well, meaning that the Dalek can actually be posed holding it up and down to the side and everything like that. It doesn't weigh it down, unlike the Daypol version of Dalek's Master Plan Flamethrower Dalek. And a really lovely touch as well is that this is in fact removable, meaning that you can have either a Flamethrower Dalek or just a standard Dalek having a stroll along. Due to this Dalek being a 1960s Dalek, we have the use of the very thin fender at the very bottom, we have the inclusion of the baby blue hemispheres, and we have the inclusion of the mesh around the middle section, the barrel as per usual, and then the eye stalk of course at the very top. And this time around the ear bulbs, which is a brand new inclusion, does in fact feature an orange transparent design as opposed to the standard clear. Feelings, I do not understand that word. So here we have another 10th planet Cyberman, of course originally released as a part of the Age of Steel wave, way back at the very start of the character options line of classic series action figures. And for the most part this figure is exactly the same. I'm not going to waste your time and go through it once again, just check out one of the first videos in fact within this series. A really lovely design, it includes the chest panel as well, and the wires in the very middle, and of course that brilliant looking head sculpt. It would have been nice to maybe see a slight variant on this, including the black overclock that in the earlier half of the 10th planet that they kind of hide their appearance with, and that would of course have required a brand new sculpt. However, I think it would have been a rather easy accessory to do. The one main noticeable difference of this 10th planet Cyberman in the enemies of the First Doctor's set is that the paint application on the cloth face this time round is in fact a slightly darker colour compared to the much paler colour used on the original figure. I think that the Enemies of the First Doctor set is a really good opportunity to once again army build Daleks and Cybermen from the 1960s. However, as I first mentioned with the Invasion of Time set featuring Leela and Commander Scaroth on Thorn, I kind of feel like from that release up until this release, the classic series line may have been going through a few struggles during this period, because this set does feel a little bit like a B&M re-release, in quite a lot of pre-existing sculpts and only retooling where it really is necessary, including of course the head sculpt of the Roboman, the shirt section, along with of course the Dalek flamethrower piece. Final two classic series sets of 2011 ended off the year on an absolutely brilliant high. So starting off, we have another First Doctor era set, this time round the Chase set, featuring two Daleks alongside the stunning mechanoid. Now this set, from what I can recall, had a recommended retail of around £45, which looking back is in fact a little bit of a cheat, because at the end of the day, the two Daleks we've seen many times before, and the only major new sculpt is of course the mechanoid, so really Character Options could have probably got away with selling this one for £35 very easily, because the actual contents doesn't really differ from any other set. Much like the Enemies of the First Doctor set, this set did in fact become a little bit common after its release. I do believe it was reduced quite drastically to its least at around £15 to £20 or something like that, only a matter of years ago. I do believe that these have now completely sold out, and to be honest, I do regret not getting another one, because I absolutely adore the 60s Dalek colour scheme, and I couldn't argue with having another mechanoid within the collection. Having a little bit of deja vu, because I certainly am. Both of these Daleks are exactly the same to the one that I've literally just taken a look at within the Enemies of the First Doctor set, of course featuring exactly the same colour scheme, the inclusion of the mesh around the middle section, and of course the baby blue hemispheres at the very bottom, and of course the new orange transparent bulb pieces. Although I'm not really complaining, as I have previously mentioned on a number of occasions, I am a massive fan of the 1960s era of Daleks. I think that they look absolutely brilliant on display, and I would army build these forever, so this set offered a great opportunity, accompanied with the Enemies of the First Doctor set, to really build up your 1960s Dalek army. Of course, the only main difference on these two Daleks is now that the flamethrower has been replaced with your usual Dalek manipulator arm. However, of course, none of us are here for the Daleks, we are here for this absolute beauty. It is, of course, the mechanoid, and I still can't quite believe that we've actually got one of these. Now, a very unusual thing when I was growing up as a kid as a Doctor Who fan is that even though these are action figures for children to play with, especially the new series action figures, even as a very young child, I never really played with my action figures. I just wanted to have them, and I wanted to display them in cool poses on the shelf. I never really played with them at all. However, on a number of very rare occasions, there were a number of sets that I did in fact want to have a little play with, and this was one of them, because we have two perfect opportunities with the Daleks to go up against the mechanoid, and you can recreate those fight scenes within the chase. It is a brilliant set, and a lot of play value with it, and of course the mechanoid itself is a stunning design, incredibly eye-catching, and I would have loved to see the mechanoids return in Doctor Who. However, of course, that sadly never happened. However, Big Finish did of course take them on in a number of different stories. So this is of course a large spherical design. We have a number of sort of triangular sections on this, a really lovely pattern. At the very bottom we have this black and silver design as well, and then of course in the very middle we get these vent sections, which is from what I believe the sound comes out of, or something like that, when they say we at the mechanoids, and the, you know, the weird thing that they do. I can't quite do the accent, as you can probably tell. A really lovely feature is that we have these little prongs as well, which do pop out at the side, meaning that you can rather brilliantly grab your Dalek. He can be running up and exterminating whatever, and he can then cuddle him to death, or whatever they do in the actual story. So naturally you could build up an army of these and have them in a ton of different poses. Of course, this one is currently in the almost dormant mode, so we have the little arm section here. In the very middle it's this circle silver piece, and you can pull this out, so he's kind of sensing something like that, I don't quite know, but he can roam around like this, and then of course when he wishes to, he can of course use his flame. Now this is a removable section, so once again you can pull this out and then of course put the flame piece in, making the figure look a lot more dramatic. And much like the flamethrower Dalek, this transparent piece is sort of a more orangey design at the tip, leading to a more pure red at the very bottom. And then of course one final little action feature is this little dish here at the very top, which is pulling that out. We do of course have a few little paint taps on this, including some circular sections, as well as of course the dish there at the very top. So yeah, a really cool figure. I absolutely love this. It's probably one of my favourite figures, in fact. And at the very bottom as well, to aid the playability, we do also have a series of casters there, meaning that it can spin around and do absolutely all sorts, because he's a mechanoid and he's incredibly cool and nobody's judging him. And of course no mechanoid will be complete without going up against the Daleks. So thank you very much for watching yet another episode of Doctor Who, the classic series action figures a history. I hope you have enjoyed it. Do of course stay tuned on the Host Productions for brand new Doctor Who content each and every week. And of course subscribe to get a notification for the continuation of this series in 2 weeks' time. The next episode will of course cover further classic series action figures, including more variants of Leela, this time round from the image of the Fendal, the Keeper of Traken collector set, and of course another variant of Davros, this time round from Remembrance of the Daleks. So until then, I shall see you all next time. Bye for now.